Camille, what we'd like to know first is, should the government protect the citizens against environmental hazards?
Should the government protect it? Well, it's not a complicated question, but there's some nuance there. The government should certainly enforce contracts. The government should enforce property rights. I think when the government gets into the primary business of protecting the environment, oftentimes they do more harm than good. There is certainly a lot of evidence to suggest that historically the EPA, for example, by coming in and creating standards rather than creating a ceiling for pollution, oftentimes can create a new floor.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but what I meant was environmental hazards that might harm the citizens. Say like the BP oil spill.
Sure, but even there again, I don't know that people need the government to protect them from that. In the case of the BP oil spill, the way in which deep water drilling was actually allowed by the government precipitated the problem that the government is supposed to be trying to solve for us. They
didn't do a good job, but you think they should prevent industry from doing things that can harm the citizens, or not?
Well, in my own ideal world, I suspect that there would be plenty of incentives to keep a company from BP from doing bad things that might create the sort of extreme harm that we saw with the Deep Horizon issue. But in the universe that we live in, the notion that there's some outside force that comes in and punishes BP if they do something that has these externality effects doesn't seem totally outrageous to me. Again, there's something about protecting property rights involved there. The question is, who really owns the ocean? So who's going to police it, right?
Well, should the government protect citizens against people that want to speed in their car and expose other people to risk?
Well, again, it's a property rights issue. Who owns the roads?
It's a property rights issue?
Absolutely. Who owns the roads? Who makes the determination how fast you can drive on the roads? It's a pretty fun. That is the first fact that we'll have to overcome. At this point, the government is building and paving the roads. The government sets the rules of the road, and some of those rules of the road are you stop at a stop sign at a red light, and apparently you can go 65 and a 55, but don't go any faster than that or we're likely to pull you over and give you a very, very pricey ticket.
So if a developer wants to let people, they make the road and they want people to be able to go 100 miles an hour in a residential neighborhood, that's okay?
Well, again, if a private company builds a private road and it belongs to them and they say the speed limit is 100 miles per hour here.
Actually, they do. You know, the developers do build the roads in residential areas.
Paid for with tax dollars.
No, they pay for the roads themselves.
Oh, you mean
in a neighborhood? In a neighborhood, yeah. They make the roads, but the fact that they make the roads doesn't mean that you don't have to obey speed limits there.
And again,
in other words, I'm trying to get at.
It's a somewhat technical issue. I mean, we're having a rather abstract conversation.
Yes,
in principle, should the government be in the business of making all of the rules pertaining to traffic? Well, they don't make a specific rule about when you're allowed to change lanes, right? So obviously it's not necessary for them to do that. But in the system that we currently have, where most of the roads that we use most of the time are actually provided for by a government, the notion that a government agency is sort of regulating them isn't particularly terrifying to me.
So in an ideal world, would it be okay then for the citizens to engage in any kind of risky behavior, like driving at 100 miles an hour, and there would be no government restriction of very dangerous activities, like drilling stupidly like BP did, and but in the case of the driving, exposing people to death.
Well, I think
it's not exactly
exposing other people to death.
That's right.
Well, again,
I mean, 100 miles an hour in a residential section exposes the people in that residential section to death.
I am not opposed to having sort of abstract conversations like this. I just think it's a little bit more difficult than that. In general, if I just being abstract, if I built a road and everyone driving on that road knew there was no speed limit at all, something like the Autobahn, for example, not that it doesn't have any speed limit, but let's say it's very, very high, everyone understands the risk they take when they drive on this particular road, then practically speaking, sure, people can drive as fast as they want. Everyone understands the risks. The liabilities are primarily their own, unless they do something that is outside of the bounds of what is expected, where it's actually reckless. For example,
I agree with you. I agree with you. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But my example was in a residential area where there's houses, not an autobahn.
Again, if I'm building, I'm building a road.
Okay, well, let's deal with your example. Let's deal with your example. Driving while drunk. Should the government have
Again,
a function?
It's still a property rights issue. Like, that is still ultimately the issue.
You think it's no? I think actually that is exactly the problem. It's not a property rights issue because no, it's an issue of exposing your citizens to.
I think it's totally fine for the government to make a rule preventing people from driving drunk on the roads that the government is paying for. I think that is totally fine and acceptable. I'm not really sure what we're going for.
But if it's in a neighborhood where the developer made all the roads, then people can drive drunk and expose other people to death based on drunk driving?
I just said that in this neighborhood, in this state, the government is making the rules, the government is paid for the roads. Even in this particular neighborhood, there are often homeowners associations. Again, this is somewhat nuanced. Philosophically, I'm not sure what we're trying to parse out here.
Well, philosophically, I was trying to determine whether the government has a role under a libertarian model to prevent
libertarian model? I think there are anarcho-capitalists, minarchists.
No, okay, well, let's say a freedom-based, in my view, a limited government-based society. Does the government have a role in preventing actions, behavior that exposes other people to harm that's very risky, that's objectively very risky, like the examples that you gave and I gave, where one was driving 100 miles an hour in a residential neighborhood or driving drunk?
I think in order for us to do any of these things with the theoreticals, there might be any number of questions that I would ask in addition to it to give you a sort of thoughtful, considered answer. But in general, I think I would agree with the following statement, or I agree with the following statement, which is that it's not the role of government to protect us from ourselves, right? I'm
not talking about protecting us. Protecting. Oh, sorry. My mistake.
No, it's totally fine. I'd also say that I don't think it's appropriate for the government to preemptively prevent you from doing dangerous behavior, just generally dangerous behavior, like say driving, not necessarily driving a little too fast, but if you decide to get drunk, they don't get to stop you from getting drunk because you might go drive a car and crash it into someone.
No, we agree on that. That wasn't the issue. The issue is, can you drive while you're extremely drunk and expose your citizens to the risk?
I think I've already.
You think you think the government should have the right to prevent you from engaging in that dangerous behavior or not?
In general, in the world that we live in, yeah, that's probably a good idea.
Even though, it's a good idea to have the
stop
law
them
against driving drunk.
Yes.
In the world we live in another world, it would be okay.
I don't want to talk theoretically about this other world. I don't know that that's particularly useful exercise.
Okay.
I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to some of this stuff, and I love to sort of muse philosophically about the extent to which we can extend the spheres of freedom. I love to think about that, but I'm a guy who believes in law, in emergent sense, the notion that over time we develop customs and traditions that help guide our civilization and help to bring about the greatest good for most of us, and allow for prosperity and allow for the free exchange of goods and services and gains from trade. I like to believe in all of that. But again, I don't know that there's tremendous amount for us to gain from the philosophical wrangling over whether or not it's okay ever for the government to pass a blanket prohibition on people drinking and driving. I think today, in the world that we live in, totally appropriate. If we had all private roads, I don't think there would be many people who would be happy to drive on roads on which it was not an enforced rule or regulation or requirement that you didn't drive if you were X amount drunk. I think that's a pretty safe assumption to make. Does that make sense?
Well, there are people that say the government should not make it illegal or intervene unless you actually cause a harm. So dangerous behavior is not a category that they accept.
I understand.
And that's what we've been discussing,
right.
in essence. In other words, we've been discussing whether there are some activities like driving extremely drunk,
sure,
and 100 miles an hour in a residential section that are on their face so dangerous that you can't wait until you kill someone and then say, oh, well, now we're going to prosecute you.
Like building a nuclear bomb or something in your
now we're going to prosecute you. It's too. We want to prevent some dangerous behavior.
Yeah.
I fall on that side of the line. And in other words, I think that if it's objectively so dangerous to your fellow citizens, it's not. You can risk your own life and jump off your own bridge if you want, but you can't make it risky. Create a risky environment for other citizens that you may not be able to repair in damages economically. You might take their life.
I understand what you're saying.
And so it's too late then.
Mm-hmm.
So which side do you fall on?
I think I've kind of answered the question.
You agree with me or not?
In general, sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, should the government redistribute its citizens' wealth?
No.
Okay, so you want to explain why that's wrong, because a lot of people don't understand it. I agree with you.
I don't have time, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna catch a train.
Oh, you're gonna catch a train. Okay, well, let's talk about.
No, I mean I don't have time to continue.
Oh, we use it all up on the dangerousness.
5 to 10 minutes, but I've got to run.
Oh,
I got to catch a train.
Okay, well, it was great to interview you, and I'd like to suggest that you use on your program some Socratic interviewing techniques where you reveal contradictions in our politicians' thinking.
Okay.
And that's what I do when I interview them.
Okay.
So if you want to see my interview with Harry Reid, or you want to see with Connolly or with Santorum, I take them to a point-blank contradiction. So
sounds good.
Maybe you can.
It's only so hard to get them to contradict themselves. They do that all the time.
Well, I'm saying contradict themselves as they sit.
Sure.
Not a contradiction between what they said one day and then what they said the next day, or what they said today and what they did yesterday.
Yeah.
I'm saying a contradiction that's in their mind as they sit.
Got it.
So it was a lot of fun talking to you, and I appreciate the interview.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you.